But you're really just below me in a state. I'm right above you in Wisconsin. It's nice to see all of you. We're looking forward to hearing from you and meeting all of you. We'll introduce ourselves first and then have you introduce yourselves. So good afternoon. My name is Beth Ratway. I am a Senior Technical Assistance Coordinator for the American Institutes for Research. John?
I'm John DeLoach. I'm the Senior Staff Attorney for the South Carolina Association of Counties.
And I'm Sue Leeson, Senior Justice, Oregon Supreme Court.
Good. Can you introduce yourselves, please?
Hello, we are Unit 2 from Maine South High School. Our esteemed coaches are Andrew Trankel and Kevin C. Hansen. My name is Cooper Katowski.
And I'm Susie Curry.
I'm Molly Russell.
I'm Brecken Enright.
And I'm Justin Kim. Thank you so much for having us today.
Thank you.
Well, it's no surprise what question we're going to do. We are in Unit 2, question 2. And so I'll read it and then you may begin. One founder claimed that the representatives should refine and enlarge the public views by passing them through the medium of a chosen body of citizens whose wisdom may best discern the true interest of their country. Do you agree or disagree with this claim? What alternative systems of representation were considered by the founders, and what alternative systems of representation, if any, should be considered in the 21st century?
In his first speech at the New York Ratification Convention, Alexander Hamilton said, quote, "The true principle of a republic is that the people should choose whom they please to govern them." He mirrored Madison's claim in Federalist Number 10, which supported a republican form of government with a body of elected officials to represent the people.
We agree with Madison's argument in Fed 10 that a body of elected officials who represent the interests of their constituents is the best design for a Republican government. However, Madison's ideals have not been fulfilled by many representatives, and as a result, more populist candidates are being backed by citizens who feel misrepresented.
In Federalist Number 10, Madison argues that a chosen body of citizens elected to represent the public could be a remedy for factions. He says, quote, "There are two methods of curing the mischiefs of faction, the one by removing its causes, the other by controlling its effects," end quote.
The other half of his argument deals with the size of the union. Detractors of Madison's argument believe the size of the union was too large to have proper representation in the federal government. Madison counters this argument by saying, "You take in a greater variety of parties and interests, you make it less probable that a majority of the whole will have a common motive to invade the rights of other citizens."
He believed the size of the union would decrease the chances of an elected official misrepresenting the beliefs of their constituents. While Madison's view of representatives who act in the best interests of their voters should remain the goal today, we see elected officials who don't follow through on the promises made to their voters during campaigns.
There must be an ongoing effort for representatives to be elected as fairly as possible for Madison's claim about their function to prevail. Journalist Benjamin Witz explains, quote, "Madison believed that the moral equality at the heart of the Declaration's revolutionary doctrine could coexist with political inequality and social hierarchy."
If representatives are to enlarge and refine the public views, they must represent all Americans. With the passage of the 15th and 19th Amendments, legislators became more representative of their people.
In the 17th Amendment, the direct election of senators made legislatures beholden to those they represent instead of state governments, which Article 1, Section 3 originally instituted. Even with new election processes that have expanded the democratic process, representative bodies have continued to face new challenges that impair their ability to function as Madison originally intended them to. During the convention, a large issue was which system of representation the national government would utilize. The Virginia plan proposed a legislature divided into two bodies with proportional representation. This plan had few aspects of federalism, and there were worries that people would feel more connected to their districts and state governments would hold less power.
The New Jersey plan was created as an alternative to the Virginia plan and proposed a unicameral legislature with equal votes for states. The plan was structured similarly to the government under the Articles with a few added powers.
However, both plans were ultimately rejected and a compromise was formed that infused elements of both federalism, which gave states as a whole more power through geographical representation in the Senate and gave individual districts their voice in the House.
The United States should consider implementing ranked choice voting in order to create a system that better reflects the will of the people. This electoral system allows the voter to rank their votes for multiple candidates instead of just winner takes all.
It would allow for better representation by removing vote splitting in the current system and encourages more representation of third-party candidates. In places like Australia, where ranked choice voting has been used for more than a century, politics are more centrist rather than the polarization we see in countries like the US today.
As a nation, we are increasingly polarized and it is becoming harder to truly see the will of the people. Ranked choice voting is an electoral system that can solve some of the issues in American politics and facilitate a better functioning group of representatives that act as Madison hoped they would.
Madison's goal for elected officials to effectively represent their constituents is the ideal way for our legislative branch to function. However, without the implementation of new systems, the government will not be representative of the people.
Thank you. We are now open for questions.
Go ahead, Sue, or either.
I want to follow up on a couple of points that you made in your presentation. What is the cause of factions according to Madison? What is the problem that leads to factionalism that needs to be resolved in our electoral system?
In Federalist 10, Madison says that liberty is like heir to factions. So he's saying that when we give broad freedom to lots of people, that factions will inevitably form, but that the government we have set up is the remedy to this disease that is incident in Republican government in the same Federalist paper.
Okay, well, in fact, and I'm just going to state a fact from the Federalist paper, he says it's the various and unequal distribution of property that is the primary source of factionalism. How does the representative system deal with that problem of the unequal distribution of property? And how does expanding representation solve the problem of factions?
Well, at the time of ratification, voting was really only extended to people who owned property. And I think as we saw more people be given the right to vote through the 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, that sort of elitism where people who only owned property had the right to vote, that kind of went away. In a sense, I mean, obviously there is still a lot of elitism in the government, but that was one way to get rid of it and make representation more distributed through people in America.
Go ahead, John.
Sorry. And adding on to what my colleague was saying about property and representation, we see this debate with slavery and the 3/5 clause. The founders and the framers were debating on whether or not to actually give representation to the slaves because the Northerners argued that why couldn't property like their own cattle be included as representative in the government, whereas the Southerners got to use their slaves to get more votes in the system. And I just believe that this kind of relates to what Molly was saying earlier.
Go ahead, John.
All right. 2 or 3 times in your presentation, you alluded to the fact that there are representatives that aren't living up to the promises they made to their constituents. Is that a constitutional problem, or is it a political problem? If it's either one, how do you fix it?
I would argue that it is mostly a political problem. We see that representatives are straying further from the will of the people. We see that 5% of Americans are millionaires, while 50% of congressmen are millionaires, so that these people are not as representative as they used to be. Only 23% of Congress are people of color. So I think we're beginning to stray further from this system of representation that is necessary to benefit our union.
And adding on to what my colleague said, I think that straying farther away, I think that populist candidates like Donald Trump in 2016 was a great example of a political problem where he wasn't fulfilling the motives of the people. It was during Corona in 2020, he would explicitly state that vaccines would be rolled out soon, and he never gave specific dates, never set up a specific plan, and would just keep saying things, I think, in the terms of just getting reelected and just wanting the people to like him instead of actually truly representing the will of the people and doing what's best for them.
I completely agree with what my colleague said. And to address the part of your question about how we can change this, as we do agree that is mostly a political problem, I think one thing we can do specifically in the Senate
is try to reform the filibuster, which is something that stops lots and lots of legislation from passing from historical acts like the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Many things keep getting filibustered, and I would propose that we increase the amount of acts like the Affordable Care Act that can't be filibustered, or decrease the amount of votes needed to break a filibuster to make our legislative system function more efficiently.
So making sure I'm not on mute, let me better understand this. So, but you're also saying that this polarization and getting our elected officials to function better as a group, you're saying that ranked choice voting is going to solve that. Can you talk me through that?
I would argue that ranked choice voting is most effective in multiple winter elections. New York is set to use ranked choice voting in their mayoral election in June. So we see that this is becoming more increasingly popular. And in San Francisco in the past few years, they've used ranked choice voting, which has increased civil discussion between voters on who they would like to rank their voters. And it eliminates like runoff money that they can save and put towards these elections. So I think it's becoming more popular and more beneficial to centrist politics.
So how is it helping? How will it help our elected officials behave better or get along, as you were saying, functioning as a group? How will it get us away from polarization?
Well, what I think it would do is it would allow people who are voting sort of not necessarily ignore entirely, but get away from voting for a certain candidate just because they represent their party. Voters will be able to look at candidates no matter what it says next to their name, whether it's an R or a D or an I, and they can pick candidates who they think actually represent what they want. And typically that is more centrist political figures who, once they do get elected, would be able to facilitate compromise and go with what their voters want. And that would allow people to not have to feel beholden to a certain party just because it's the party that they normally vote for.
I think that it's also important to mention that in our two-party system today, a lot of the popular candidates that are able to go far in the campaigns and the elections have historically been very wealthy. There was in 2020, over $2.4 billion was spent on political campaigns. Over $1 billion was spent on the Donald Trump campaign. And I think that with ranked choice voting, it will open the system to a greater variety of candidates and wouldn't just focus on the two that have the most spending for this political campaign.
And
Explain to me why that is so. I don't get that. I would still have to be pretty rich to get into a fight among other rich people, wouldn't I?
Well, our fundamental core principle on our argument is the power of the person's vote. We are trying to implement ranked choice voting because we are trying to make people's vote actually believe that they matter, because ranked choice voting is a system where basically it allows basically your vote to count no matter what. And I believe it's just about the people's representation. And that is why I believe so many people have issues with like the Electoral College, for example, which reminds me of like a statistic as to why 61% are in favor of abolishing the Electoral College.
That's time. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, we'll give you some feedback. John, would you like to go first?
All right, thank you. I think that was entertaining. You had some good arguments. They were well reasoned. I'm not sure you got into some of the details that I would have liked to have heard. I think you're kind of blending two issues together. The idea of majority of successful candidates for the House and Senate are millionaires, and ranked choice voting. I don't know that those are the same issue. I think even with multiple candidates, you're still going to have
A lot of money.
significant money, personal money, to run for national office, because it's not cheap to be a member of Congress. You have to afford not only travel back and forth from your home district to Washington, you've got to afford housing in Washington, D.C., and you have to be able to give up any job that you have in your home district to represent full-time your district, or in the case of the Senate, your state. So I think you need to look at that and see how those issues are different.
Yeah. Nice presentation, very engaging, and I'm sure we would like to stay the rest of the day and visit about a number of the topics that you raised. Where I'm left sort of with additional questions, and this is following up on what John just said, is I need more clarity about what the problem is. On the one hand, you say it's representatives do something different in office than they promise when they campaign. Another place I see you say, well, the real evil is money. The real evil is polarization. And it's not clear to me how ranked choice voting is the solution to those problems. So I would push you harder to identify what is the problem and how your proposed solution addresses the problem. Madison thought the problem was factions. Factions are tied to property. Property is tied to wealth. He thought he had a solution to that by, as he says in Federalist 51, making interest counteract ambition, interest and ambition counteract ambition. And it's the fighting of the factions that will let trickle out policies that are at least not harmful. So he has a very comprehensive theory for explaining the problem as he sees it, unequal distribution of property, and his representative solution. You guys disagree with it, I think, but what I'm not seeing is how ranked choice voting solves whatever it is that you have identified as the problem. So I just push you to clarify a little more on both the problem and the solution and how those two are related. Thank you so much for a very engaging conversation.
Yeah, thank you for a deep dive into some really complex topics. We're here to push you, so I know sometimes that's uncomfortable, but that's what we're here for. We're here to ask questions because, you know, it's very rare that you get an opportunity to have these types of conversations, and so that's what we're here for. And I think your opening presentation did hit some of the points. I did also miss that flow that you started with, right? So you talked about the problem historically, you talked about what they looked at, and you talked about kind of how they came to a compromise, but then we get into yours and we don't have that same background, like this is the issue, or what's the issue and how are we going to solve it, or these are the two issues, this is one way of looking at it, this is another way of looking at it. We got to some of that in the follow-up. She started talking about filibuster. We obviously would have gotten to the electoral college sooner than later, and thinking about this public policy, like who makes those decisions and how can we get some of these things done, and actually what is it solving and does it really solve it? So I think just diving deeper into having conversations amongst yourselves, doing some more reading and thinking about and reflecting on, we're not saying these are bad choices, we're just wanting to know how you correlate them to it. I mean, these are, you hit the issues, right? Polarization, wealthy, I mean, they're the issues, but what more concretely can really address that and walk us through your theory of action on that. So thank you very, very much for that conversation, because it was a conversation, and we appreciate that.
Indeed.
Thank you so much, students. Thank you, Judge